Great. Hello,
Awesome.
everyone, and welcome to our Facebook Live and Instagram Live conversation. I am so excited that today we get to talk about a topic that many people have been asking me about on social media and that I've been hearing about. What should we be doing? How should we be thinking about supporting our creative economy, our artists, and our creative community in Boston? And we have no one better to talk about this than someone who is covering this, who is involved in it, who has been thinking a lot about this issue. Arielle Gray is an arts editor at WBUR and has written extensively on this and very deeply plugged into the artist community. Okay, I'm seeing we have a few issues on Instagram, so okay, maybe just Facebook Live today, but I'll keep trying. I'll keep fiddling with it during the podcast. But Ari, could you just introduce yourself? How did you end up in the role that you're in now, pre-COVID, and what are some of the observations that you're seeing from the community itself during COVID?
I got into this job, I guess, almost 2 years ago now. I've always been a writer, always been an arts organizer here in Boston, more specifically Roxbury, working at a nonprofit. And I happened to get a fellowship at WBUR, which turned into a full-time position. So currently I am the arts engagement producer for the Artery at WBUR, meaning that I handle a lot of our outward facing programming in which we do civically engage with artists and arts communities and stakeholders here in Boston. I think one of the most stark things I've seen, especially coming from an organizing background, is just the cancellation of gig after gig after gig, venue shutting down, museums shutting down. I mean, museums sometimes are places where a lot of artists go to for either gigs or performances, but beyond that, restaurants are closed. So a lot of musicians who used to gig in restaurants now are out of income. Photo shoots are being canceled. So really artists are kind of being monetarily impacted in all sorts of kind of unforeseen ways.
And so just tell us a little bit about Boston's arts and artist community, kind of, COVID aside. What makes Boston's creative community special? What distinguishes us? And what should we know about it as we're talking about what the community is going through right now?
I think that's a really hard question. I think to fully explain that, we'd have to go into a lot of things, just like the history of Boston, the history of neighborhoods in Boston. But I think what makes Boston artists so unique is that Boston is at once both small and very large. And I think Boston artists have really done an incredible job of not only creating platforms for themselves, but platforms for other artists. I mean, I think we see this in a myriad of ways, not just in Boston, but beyond Boston. I mean, Lynn, Lowell, all of these other areas that are outside of the city are really kind of cultivating these spaces where artists are able to have some sort of autonomy over not only the art they create, but the communities that they're building through their art. And I think that's something really special. I think that Boston gets a lot of flack sometimes, especially in the music industry. But we have an abundance of talent here. And I'm really happy to be working with the artists who are here in the city.
And so just walk us through what you've heard from, individuals and friends and acquaintances in the community. So when the museums are closed, when the gigs are canceled, what does that mean for that person's kind of month or year or living, housing, economic situation overall?
Yeah, so a lot of artists are working for themselves, which means that unlike people who work 9 to 5, I'm very blessed that I have a job where I do have some sort of security. If I get laid off, I can file for unemployment. So right now, I think a lot of artists are having difficulty finding out which programs they can apply to for financial assistance, precisely because so many of them are used to working for themselves. I know many artists typically will budget out their month or a couple months ahead. So say they're doing a gig, maybe a series for $10,000. They're betting on that money to come in to pay their expenses for the next couple of months. So when you really begin to look at things like that, you can see how big of an impact just one gig cancellation can have for an artist, depending on what that gig or that contract may be. I think a lot of artists are also now kind of looking a little bit more closely at some of the contracts that they're signing, and realizing that a lot of these contracts are based on either the deliverance of a product or a show. And so oftentimes they're not even getting compensated if that show or that thing doesn't happen. They're not getting paid for that. And so I think now a lot of artists are looking into, okay, so how do I write that into my contract? Is there some sort of kill fee that I write into my contract in case something like this happens, where I'm still guaranteed a deposit of that money? I think it's just a lot of different things that happen to impact artists at all of these different intersections and points that a lot of folks don't have to if you're just, you're working for a company,
Absolutely. And so what are you hearing? So let's just talk about first how folks are trying to recoup some of this income, and then secondly, some of the support, maybe assistance resources that are available. Are you seeing any creative ways where people are trying to, schedule virtual gigs or do other events? Is there an opportunity there for there to be some gigs that, even if it's not in person?
Yeah, and I've definitely seen a ton of artists kind of jump on this virtual gateway. And the beautiful thing about virtual is that almost everybody has an iPhone or access to an iPhone. So it really allows you to expand your audience beyond just the Boston area, which is probably what it would mainly be if you had a gig in person. So I think artists are finding a lot of freedom in scheduling and programming these online events. They often come at a pretty low cost. And I think what a lot of people want to see is maybe like some sort of artistic process. So I've seen artists do, like online writing workshops. We actually just did a live with photographer OJ Slaughter, who gave us a look into their artistic process and how they set up and did a photo shoot in their living room. So there are all of these different kind of really creative ways that artists are coming up with to still serve their community and get their art out there. I think the question is if folks are gonna, open up their pockets and monetarily support, which is, you can be watching something, but if you're not monetarily supporting, then sometimes it doesn't really do the artist that much of a good. Yeah.
So on that other side, are you aware of any funds that people are setting up where folks can donate to support Boston area artists, or are there other resources that you would recommend? And I'll give a shout out here to the city's fund that was just announced last week that will provide, it'll be probably first come first serve, and we're working to make sure that it'll be equitably distributed as well and people know about it and all that. But the city is trying to fill some of that gap between what the federal government and the state government is offering, so that if you don't qualify because you are undocumented or you're a gig worker or some other way you're not qualifying, or you had earned too much before you were laid off to qualify for some of these other programs, there will be a little bit of a kind of short-term band-aid that the city is able to provide. But what else are you hearing about?
So I guess the first one obviously would be kind of the overarching conversation is the CARES Act. And so they are opening that up to people who work in the gig economy, people who are 1099 contractors. And there hasn't been so much of an update on exactly how that process is going to work or what that looks like. The only thing about that is it looks like you're going to have filed taxes before as either self-employed or 1099 in order to qualify for that, which I know can kind of knock a lot of artists out of the running as far as applying. But don't quote me on that. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the ins and outs of the CARES Act, but from what I know, that seems to kind of be one of the pitfalls for artists who've worked for themselves. Other than that, there are a ton of funds and grants that have come up, which I think is just really amazing to see how community can come together to support artists. And I'm just going to kind of click over to another one. I just saw someone said, please publish a written link list of everything mentioned. If you're talking about the funds and grants I'm about to talk about, I actually do have a link that I think I can maybe share with Michelle so that we can put it
Yeah,
in
let's
the
check that out.
comments for people. And it's an ongoing list that we have over at the Artery that we're constantly adding to as we get more and more word. So some of these are national. So there is there's a Musicians Foundation Fund for musicians who've lost income due to the coronavirus epidemic. There is the Pan American Writers Emergency Fund that you can apply to. Some of the local ones, the Mass Cultural Council COVID-19 Relief Fund. Those are grants up to $1,000 for independent artists who've lost income. There's another one that just came out called Powerful Pathways Artist Emergency Relief Fund. These are gifts for $200, $300, or $500, and this is for artists of marginalized identities in the Boston area. Shout out Ali, who put that together through the Boston's Black and Brown Creative Group on Facebook. She's doing a ton of work over there. I definitely suggest checking that group out. There's the Boston Singers Relief Fund, Boston Music Maker COVID-19 Relief Fund from the record company, and also the Cambridge Artist Relief Fund. So there are definitely different options for folks to apply to. However, the thing that I am hearing from artists is that some of these application processes are kind of cumbersome, either that or they feel like they don't have the necessary documentation. Some are asking for like 5 years proof of income. Some artists just don't have that. A lot of artists also may not have done their taxes. I know I haven't really done my taxes as an artist. And so that's also a barrier to accessing some of these grants and funds. There are also a lot of mutual aid reliefs going around where people are kind of just like exchanging resources or money. And artists can sign up for that too. I believe there's one here in Boston. And for other different neighborhoods in Boston. So while there are definitely grants and funds available, it's not enough, you know, it's just not. And unfortunately, I think that's just, we have so many artists out there. I mean, I don't know if all of them are really going to be served by some of these grants and funds, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thanks to Dennis for asking us to post that. The amazing Jessica Pierre has posted that link that Arielle was talking about. Someone else had also wanted to add a shout out to the Theater Community Benevolent Fund, which supports Boston theater artists in times of financial need. And Alexandra has shared the website there, tcbf.org. We had a lot of love from folks that we also returned the love right back to, Shauna and Bea and others. So just getting into, you know, how I've been thinking about COVID overall is that it's an incredibly devastating impact. We are feeling it in this moment, but it's also just highlighting and deepening the inequities and injustices that had already been in place for a long time, so that the communities that are, you know, already were feeling more destabilized when it came to housing, or were working under jobs that didn't have those extra protections or benefits, that it is the cost of COVID and the cost of doing all this physical distancing, the closure of schools and businesses and childcare and cancellation of gigs is all being absorbed disproportionately by the same communities that we know need intentionality. So particularly from the perspective of the creative community, how should we be thinking about that long-term recovery? And, you know, once this public health piece has passed, what will it take to get everyone back on their feet in an equitable way?
Are we talking specifically about artists, or you think just
fair, but any thoughts on
in general? Well, I think the biggest thing that people need is money, right? People, unfortunately, we live in a capitalistic society, and even during an epidemic, you know, the capitalistic wheel doesn't stop turning. And right now, I was caught up. I'm not quite sure where it is on this rent moratorium that I know City Life was trying to get passed, along with a lot of the other housing advocates in the area, as far as getting a rent freeze, so that folks are not required to pay rent during this time, obviously, because a lot of people are out of work or are not working and don't have a source of steady income right now, or they can't apply for unemployment and take advantage of that really kind of hefty CARES Act package that, you know, I think you get an extra $600 on top of what you get for unemployment if you qualify for that. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is money. And I think one of the things that is really going to help folks is, as much as I want to say that, you know, we can rely on our government, I'm kind of a pessimist at heart. I think where a lot of folks are going to find themselves relying on is the community. A lot of these small community organizations who are bringing foods to folks, who are organizing free lunches and free breakfasts for kids. I think those are the places where we're going to see a lot of community support coming out of. I really encourage everyone to make sure that if you need something, reach out to someone, post about it on Facebook. I've seen myself, I've seen a lot of people come together and share resources. I really needed an inhaler. I couldn't get to the doctor to get one. The folks over at the Dorchester Art Project came and dropped off an inhaler to me. So things like that, there are a lot of mutual aid opportunities that you can take advantage of. You know, if you have an extra $10, $15, buy a print from an artist, buy a chapbook. That's also a really great way to support artists right now, is buying their merch and buying their artwork. Even sending $5 to their Cash App or Venmo can help. Every little bit counts, and I think all of it helps in just demonstrating a larger kind of class solidarity between artists. A lot of us are working, you know, a lot of us don't have savings, a lot of us are cash poor. So how do we stand with each other? How do we exchange resources? A lot of it comes through like communicating. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. So following up on a few strands there, just in terms of the, you know, what I had seen with the rent moratorium push and housing stability measures. I know just recently, I think maybe it was, what day is today? Today's Monday. Maybe it was Friday. The state house had passed a version of the bill for a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures during the public health crisis. And the Senate is expected to take that up, and then they'll hopefully get that done. But it doesn't cover the immediate, you know, what good is just making sure people can't get displaced temporarily. And especially, we know our community members, it's not about the courts being closed. Often when people get that first notice, they may not even know that they are able to keep advocating and staying in their homes. So we need to go beyond that. And the council has just passed the resolution that was introduced by Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, introduced it 2 weeks ago, was just passed this past week. It's a non-binding resolution, so we don't have the authority to enact that, but it did get the council on record in support. And then for Wednesday's meeting, I've filed 2 measures that are meant to really push the city to do everything within our power to do. You know, we don't have the power to to put a moratorium on rents citywide, but what could we do tomorrow? We could take all the city-owned buildings and all the BPDA-owned buildings, you know, the bowling building, for example, the China Trade Center on Boylston Street, and say, you know what, all of our commercial tenants in these spaces, restaurants like Soleil and other small businesses and nonprofits, we're not going to collect rent. We're going to implement that moratorium just as landlord from the city. The other piece that we're focusing on is trying to get the city to defer property tax, maybe even further than the state has allowed for, because often those taxes are passed down to the tenants, particularly on the commercial side. So we want to make sure that we're taking that extra step too. So you mentioned supporting artists, you know, take your $5, $10, buy something, donate, you know, find someone's Cash App. How do you connect? How do you recommend people connect with artists to be able to do that? Is there a central place, or how would you recommend people find the artists that they can then go support?
I think it would be really cool if there was a central place. Maybe somebody should create that. That would be actually really helpful. I think for most people, like, you're probably aware of the artists that you either are drawn to or maybe have connected with. You're probably following them in some form on social media. Maybe you have their email, maybe like you get their newsletter every week. I think there are different ways to connect with artists, but I think that if you're already kind of plugged in, then I think it's just as simple as sending an email, sending a DM to these artists and asking in which ways they need support. Maybe they don't need money, but they do need you to advocate for them for, maybe their landlord still wants them to pay rent and they're trying to organize a rent strike. There are different ways that I think you can stand in solidarity. I see this comment. Can we make sure event planners and producers are being elevated as creatives? Absolutely, because I am one myself. Event planners, producers have also lost a ton of income with all of these things being canceled. But I've really kind of seen them just pick up the reins, and a lot of them are now doing a lot of this virtual programming and still supporting artists. So again, I think just directly reaching out and talking to artists about what it is that they feel like they need is really the best way. If you don't really know which artists to reach out to, I think there are endless resources. I mean, the Artery, we do obviously a lot of arts and culture coverage. We cover a ton of local artists. I would say look at Dig Boston, Boston Hassle, maybe even Vanyaland, maybe just tapping into some of these local magazines and websites who do feature artists and kind of figuring out which ones you feel like you can send resources to.
Got it. And so, COVID and all of the stay at home and, trying not to travel to the extent that people are able, it's really changing a lot of how we're doing business and communicating with each other in the moment. Are there, and I know from the government side, it's permanently affecting that, in some ways pushing us to do the things that we probably should have done to begin with, offer more ways for people to engage from home, for example. Are there strands of this that you think will kind of permanently shape the creative community and in all its forms in Boston? What will that community look like? And what will our art scene look like after COVID?
I hope that our art scene looks more inclusive, because honestly, a lot of these solutions that are being kind of devised right now to kind of, I guess, fill that gap, that physical gap that a lot of us are feeling. A lot of these solutions have already been proposed, especially by the disability community. I mean, the disability community has been advocating for virtual access for years and years and years. I mean, advocating for virtual access for museums. And I've heard stories from disabled artists about not being able to access spaces, even when they intentionally reach out to ask for access. So I am hoping that this teaches a lot of places that virtual is an option and that it expands opportunities for everybody. And if you think about it, if these options had been set in place before, I don't think that we would have experienced kind of like such a stark shift into, I see the kids in the background.
It might happen.
Inevitable. If we had worked some of these virtual options in to begin with, I think it wouldn't have been such a stark shift that we're experiencing right now. But yeah, I would definitely say, especially folks here, definitely connect with the disability community. I mean, I know there's a woman, Elise Patterson, who owns a dance company. She's been doing virtual dance rehearsals since before this. So where can we really pick up these cues on accessibility from the communities who have already been doing this work? I think that's a place to start. And because they've been pushing for this conversation for so long, I hope that this virtual programming still continues just to increase accessibility. And who knows, like, what if this happens again? You know what I mean? What if we really do have to rely on virtual methods to connect with each other? I hope that we see institutions and these other art stakeholders really invest in making sure that art and culture is accessible to everybody.
That is beautiful and perfect, and sounds like the seed for one of our hopefully upcoming conversations as well. We'll make sure to follow up and really push on that accessibility and highlight those who have been doing the work and advocating for so long. So as we close, just tell folks, how can they continue to follow you? What's the best way to stay up to what you're doing and the ideas that you're putting out there?
I think just, follow me on social media. I'm pretty active, I guess. I don't really like to admit that, but I am on Instagram and Twitter. You can always find our latest coverage at wbur.org/artery. Like I said, we're constantly updating that list that that Jessica was kind enough to put in the comments. So actually, we did just update it this morning with a webinar from the nonprofit Massachusetts. Hold on. Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts of Massachusetts. So they actually kind of went through unemployment and the CARES Act and what that means, because it's really confusing. Obviously, like legislation is always really confusing. So that webinar is in there if you guys need it. Also, I know I see TCBF. That's also on our list of resources and grants and funds. So Alexandra, thank you for putting that in there. That is on our list for all the folks who are wondering or are interested in seeing what that's about. So make sure to check that out. And yeah, I think that's the best way. Follow me, ask me questions. I'm usually open to sharing resources and answering anything that anybody has to ask. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Continue supporting artists. Open your pockets if you can.
Absolutely.
We all need money. We all need coin.
And we'll do our best to try to collect some of these resources also and share out and think more about if there's a way to consolidate a platform for artists to be posting what they need or sharing their way to support them, whether it's through merch or Venmo or some other app. So thank you so much, Arielle. So appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
And
thank
more
you.
next time.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.